is Dr. Richard Curtis, and I'm a member of the steering committee of 9/11 Truth Seattle. I first met our featured speaker as a student at the School of Religion at Claremont Graduate University. When I arrived in Claremont, Dr. David Ray Griffin was world famous as a theologian and an authority on the school of theology called Process. I found him to be engaging and compelling, a deeply thoughtful figure, and rigorous in his academic work. As a professor at the Claremont School of Theology and at Claremont Graduate University for 30 years, Dr. Griffin was also a co-director of the Center for Process Studies, and somehow found the time to publish dozens and dozens of articles and to write or edit 25 books. He's retired from teaching now, and the book that he will discuss this evening is his 32nd. Around the time I finished my coursework and moved up here, something horrible happened in the world that changed many lives, including eventually his. Over time and through a series of chance encounters with difficult information, he resolved to look into the allegations that were being made that what happened that day was not what we were told. During his last year before retiring, these investigations led him to write his first book on the subject, The New Pearl Harbor. And his writing that book led me to take seriously these questions. I knew Dr. Griffin to be the sort of person who is careful with details and not given to wild speculation. That book changed my life, and most of you here probably have some sort of story to tell about what brought you to ask those difficult questions, and even more so to face the disturbing answers that follow. In the last couple of years, a few official and unofficial bodies have attempted to argue that Dr. Griffin and what has come to be called the 9/11 Truth Movement are mistaken. And they've attempted to explain how what we were told is possible, in spite of the obvious impossibilities identified by various researchers over the years. Tonight, Dr. Griffin will reply to those critics of the Truth Movement. And now, it's my pleasure to present to you Dr. David Ray Griffin, author of the new book, Debunking 9/11 Debunking, an answer to popular mechanics and other defenders of the official conspiracy theory. Dr. Griffin.
Good evening. I'm glad to be speaking here in Washington, the state in which I was born a few years ago. I am, in fact, old enough to remember a popular song called "Let's Get Physical." Shortly after that song came out, it was very popular. A friend of mine, knowing my philosophical proclivities, gave me a button to wear to parties saying, "Let's get metaphysical." Now that I've been involved in the 9/11 Truth Movement for several years, I have a new plea. Let's get empirical. And that's the title of my lecture tonight, 9/11, Let's Get Empirical. The reason I make this plea is explained in the first page of my new book, Debunking 9/11 Debunking. I begin by saying the evidence that 9/11 was an inside job is overwhelming. Most people who examine this evidence with an open mind find it convincing. The only problem is to get people, especially journalists, to examine this evidence. Many of them believe that they need not do this because they already know that the claim that it was an inside job is false. As a result, many journalists, whether writing for the New York Times or The Guardian or The Progressive or The Nation, have pontificated about 9/11 while revealing that they know virtually nothing about the relevant facts. The question about what happened on 9/11 can be answered responsibly, however, only on the basis of a knowledge of these facts. And yet many journalists, like many other people, have used various means to avoid getting empirical about 9/11. One way to avoid getting empirical relies on an ambiguity in the term conspiracy theory. There are two main theories about what happened on 9/11. According to the government's theories, the attacks were planned by members of Al-Qaeda under the inspiration of Osama bin Laden. According to the alternative theory, the attacks were orchestrated or at least assisted by forces within our own government. Many people, including many journalists, assume that the 9/11 Truth Movement's theory can be dismissed a priori because it is a conspiracy theory. But a conspiracy, says my dictionary, is an agreement to perform together an illegal, treacherous, or evil act. To hold a conspiracy theory about some event is, therefore, simply to believe that that event arose out of such an agreement. This is, we can say, the generic meaning of conspiracy theory. Given this generic meaning of the term, we are conspiracy theorists if we believe individuals have conspired to rob banks, that oil companies have conspired with scientists for hire to conceal the reality of human-caused global warming, or if we believe that American presidents have conspired with members of their administration to fabricate pretexts for going to war. In other words, once we get empirical about the term conspiracy theory, we realize we're all conspiracy theorists. Announcing that one rejects conspiracy theories has become almost a reflex action. But we would be more honest if we, with Michael Moore, would say, now, I'm not into conspiracy theories, except for those that are true. In spite of the obviousness of this point, many journalists follow propagandists in using the term conspiracy theory as an accusation. We can call this the propagandistic meaning of the term. Those who use the term in this propagandistic way ignore its generic meaning. They thereby equate theories as such, conspiracy theories as such, with a particular type of conspiracy theory, that is, the ones that are irrational, unscientific, kooky. Now, there are certainly many conspiracy theories of that nature. But our newspapers and TV news programs reveal some new conspiracy almost every day as a fact. So it is dishonest. It is pure propaganda to imply that all conspiracy theories are unworthy of belief. Those who use the term in this propagandistic way against the 9/11 Truth Movement never point out that the government's theory, which they endorse, is also a conspiracy theory. That the only difference between the two theories is the identity of the conspirators. For example, Jim Dwyer of the New York Times wrote a story entitled, "Two U.S. Reports Seek to Counter Conspiracy Theories About 9/11. A more accurate title would have been, "Two U.S. Reports Say Government's Conspiracy Theory is Better Than Alternative Conspiracy Theory." In an essay entitled, "Enough of 9/11 Conspiracy Theories Already." In an essay entitled, "Enough of 9/11 Conspiracy Theories Already," Matthew Rothschild of The Progressive said, "Here's what the conspiracists believe. 9/11 was an inside job. Members of the Bush administration ordered it, not Osama bin Laden. Arab hijackers may not have done the deed. The Twin Towers fell not because of the impact of the airplanes and the ensuing fires, but because of explosives. I'm amazed at how many people give credence to these theories. He did not have a paragraph saying, here's what the government's conspiracists believe. 19 hijackers with knives and box cutters defeated the most sophisticated defense system in history. Hani Hanjour, who could barely fly a Piper Cub, flew an astounding trajectory to crash Flight 77 into the Pentagon, the most well-protected building on the planet. Other hijacker pilots, by flying planes into 2 buildings of the World Trade Center, caused 3 of them to collapse at virtually free-fall speed, straight down. I'm amazed at how many people give credence to these theories. It did not occur to Rothschild to say this because he uses conspiracy theory as a term of abuse for conspiracy theories that he does not believe. A senior editor for In These Times, writing about his experience in 2005 of seeing my C-SPAN lecture, 9/11 and American Empire, wrote that, having always thought highly of Griffin, it was shocking to see him pushing a radical conspiracy theory about 9/11 on C-SPAN. What could have transformed this sober, reflective scholar into a conspiracy theorist? The truth, of course, was that I had been a conspiracy theorist all along. But I didn't become a conspiracy theorist in his eyes until I rejected the government's conspiracy theory in favor of the alternative. If these writers can't think in these terms, all the more could they not dare to think that the reason I changed from one theory to the other was that I finally got empirical. I went from knowing virtually nothing about the relevant facts to knowing quite a few of those facts. Once we realize that both major theories about 9/11 are conspiracy theories, we can then see that we must evaluate them in the normal way. Ask which of the 2 theories stands up best in terms of the relevant facts. We must get empirical. But it might still be thought, we need not spend our time studying all those facts, all those tiresome details about standard procedures, timelines, the maximum temperature of office building fires, the melting point of steel, the testimonies of people at the World Trade Center who said they heard explosions going off, and so on, because we can know a priori that the alternative theory, according to which 9/11 was orchestrated or at least assisted by the Bush-Cheney administration, is false. We can know this because we can know that that administration would not have deliberately killed some 3,000 of its own citizens. However, if we get empirical about that a priori assumption, we can see that it is falsified by other facts that we know. Here is one such fact. After 9/11, the air at the World Trade Center site was extremely toxic, containing many times the safe level of asbestos and many other dangerous particles. Although this was known, the White House ordered the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to lie, to tell the people the air is safe to breathe. The EPA followed this order. As a result, many of the 40,000 rescue and cleanup workers wore no protective gear. Many thousands of these workers already have permanently debilitative diseases. About 100 have already died of cancer, and cancer is a slow developing disease. So experts have predicted that more people will die over the next 10 to 15 years from breathing the toxic air than died on 9/11 itself. We have no a priori grounds to believe that the Bush administration would have been too morally sensitive to orchestrate 9/11. Let us look at a second common a priori reason given for dismissing the possibility that 9/11 might have been an inside job. The claim that so many people would have had to be involved, that someone would have talked by now. The general assumption behind this is that big government operations cannot be kept secret. However, the Manhattan Project to build an atomic bomb involved over 100,000 workers, yet it was kept so secret that even Vice President Harry Truman did not learn about it until he became president. Another example, in 1957, the United States provoked and participated actively in a civil war in Indonesia that resulted in 40,000 deaths. This illegal war was kept secret from the American people until a book about it came out in 1995. Secrets can be kept, especially when those who know the secrets are likely to lose their jobs or even go to jail if they talk. And if that prospect is not sufficient, there are other well-known means for keeping people silent. Furthermore, people who talk generally do so in the context of a criminal investigation, in which telling the truth is the only way to save their own skins. And yet with 9/11, there has not been any real investigation at all, let alone a criminal investigation. So it should not be a big surprise that no one has talked. There is, however, still another reason why many journalists believe they need not examine the facts about 9/11 for themselves. They think they should rely on the official reports about 9/11 that have been put out by the 9/11 Commission and by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, along with some semi-official accounts, such as the book Debunking 9/11 Myths, put out by Popular Mechanics. The assumption behind this belief that these are neutral organizations who have put out scientific studies. Nothing could be further from the truth. The 9/11 Commission was run by Philip Zelikow, who was virtually a member of the Bush administration. Indeed, he was even brought in by his close friend and former co-author Condoleezza Rice to write the 2002 version of the National Security Strategy of the United States, which used 9/11 as a basis for developing a new doctrine of preventive warfare. Was a Zelikow-run commission likely to reveal any evidence that would suggest that the 9/11 attacks were orchestrated by the Bush administration? The National Institute of Standards and Technology is an agency of the Commerce Department and therefore an agency of the Bush-Cheney administration. An administration that had become notorious for distorting science for partisan political purposes. Indeed, over 11,000 scientists, including 52 Nobel Prize winners, have endorsed a statement accusing the Bush administration of engaging in distortion of scientific knowledge for partisan political ends. Can we assume a priori that scientists working for this administration would not distort facts while they are writing a report about why the World Trade Center buildings collapsed? The semi-official status of the Popular Mechanics book is demonstrated by the fact that it was endorsed by Condoleezza Rice's State Department as providing excellent material debunking 9/11 conspiracy theories. Popular Mechanics says of itself that it was ideally equipped to research the evidence about 9/11 because of its more than 100 years of expertise in science and technology. 100 years of expertise in science and technology. However, just before the magazine began working on 9/11, the president of Hearst Magazines, Kathleen Black, who is married to a former employee of the CIA and the Department of Defense, replaced much of the staff, including the longtime creative director and the editor-in-chief. Moreover, one of the new members of the staff, who described himself as the senior researcher for the magazine's 2005 article about 9/11, on which its 2006 book is based, was Benjamin Chertoff, a cousin of the head of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff. When Benjamin's mother was asked whether he was related to Michael Chertoff, she said, "Yes, of course, he's his cousin." But the new editor-in-chief at Popular Mechanics, James Meigs, has tried to cast doubt on this connection. He misquotes her statement. Then he speaks of the odd coincidence that the two men have the same last name. And he allows only that it's possible that Ben and Michael are distantly related. This is one of the unintentionally hilarious moments in this book. Although Meigs claims that he and his crack staff were able in just a few months to discover the truth about why the hijacked airliners were not intercepted, why the 3 buildings came down, and what happened at the Pentagon, and what happened to Flight 93. They could not discover whether a member of their own staff was related to the head of Homeland Security. The moral of this discussion, in any case, is that none of these official or semi-official reports can be assumed to be the unvarnished truth about 9/11 or anything close. However, many journalists, treating these reports as if they were authoritative, have been led to absurd conclusions. For example, Alexander Coburn accepts the 9/11 Commission's claim that the military failed to intercept the hijacked airliners because of incompetence at the FAA. He then, on this basis, refers to the 9/11 Truth Movement as the 9/11 conspiracy nuts. Members of this movement, Coburn charges, know no military history, have no grasp of the real world, no conception of evidence, and they represent the ascendancy of magic over reason. This charge might seem plausible, as long as all one knows about the 9/11 movement is that one of its spokespersons is a theologian. Coburn calls me the guru of the 9/11 conspiracy movement, as if it were a faith-based movement, not a fact-based movement. However, if one gets empirical about the 9/11 Truth Movement, one can quickly see that Coburn's characterization cannot even qualify as a caricature. The movement includes Colonel Robert Bowman, the head of the Star Wars program during the Ford and Carter administrations; Andreas von Bülow, former state secretary in the German Federal Ministry of Defense; General Leonid Ivashov, former chief of staff of the Russian Armed Forces; Colonel Robert D. Ray, a highly decorated Vietnam veteran who became Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense during the Reagan administration; and many other former military officers, such as Lieutenant Colonel Guy Razor, an Air Force fighter pilot who says, "After 4+ years of research since retirement in 2002, I am 100% convinced that the attacks of September 11, 2001 were planned, organized, and committed by treasonous perpetrators that have infiltrated the highest levels of our government." The movement also includes organizations called Pilots for 9/11 Truth, Scholars for 9/11 Truth, Scholars for 9/11 Truth and Justice, Veterans for 9/11 Truth, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and SPINE, the scientific panel investigating 9/11. The movement also contains several former intelligence officers, including former CIA analysts Bill Christensen and Ray McGovern. The movement was also endorsed, shortly before his death, in 2006 by William Sloane Coffin, who had been a Russian specialist for the CIA before he became a well-known preacher and a civil rights and anti-war activist. As this list makes clear, the 9/11 Truth movement, if examined empirically, cannot be dismissed as a bunch of conspiracy nuts with no grasp of the real world and of military matters, as people who, having no conception of evidence, engage in magical thinking. Coburn's unempirical approach to the 9/11 movement, combined with his uncritical acceptance of official reports, has led him to make charges that are obviously absurd. The moral of this discussion is that there is no a priori way to make a responsible judgment as to which of the theories is correct. We must look at the facts, then ask which theory better fits those facts. We must get empirical. At this point, defenders of the official theory could say, exactly, and that's what we have done. Thomas Kane and Lee Hamilton, the chair and vice chair of the 9/11 Commission, put out a new book in 2006 entitled Without Precedent, The Inside Story of the 9/11 Commission. They write, the starting point for the 9/11 Commission report was that it would focus on the facts. Indeed, Kane and Hamilton say, the term go to the facts became something of a joke within the Commission. The real joke, however, is their claim that this is the method they actually followed. The Popular Mechanics book is subtitled, Why Conspiracy Theories Can't Stand Up to the Facts. The authors, in explaining their approach, say, we simply chuck the facts. Not everyone who cries, Lord, Lord, Jesus of Nazareth reportedly said, really lives in accord with the will of God. Likewise, not everyone who cries, facts, facts, really follows the empirical method, letting their theories be determined by the facts rather than the other way around. Neither Popular Mechanics, nor NIST, nor the 9/11 Commission takes an empirical, scientific approach. They all begin with the official story, then construe the facts to fit that theory, even though this requires distorting some facts and eliminating many others. It is instead the 9/11 Truth movement that has gotten empirical about 9/11. I will give some examples. The whole basis for the Bush administration's attack on Afghanistan and its more general war on terror has been the claim that the attacks of 9/11 were carried out by Arab Muslim members of al-Qaeda under the leadership of Osama bin Laden. This claim, however, was never proven. Shortly after 9/11, Secretary of State Colin Powell promised to provide a white paper showing that bin Laden was responsible, but this paper was never produced. The Taliban said that it would gladly hand over bin Laden if only the United States would provide evidence of his involvement of 9/11, but the Bush administration refused, leading a Taliban spokesman to say, we have asked for proof of Osama's involvement, but they have refused. Why? The 9/11 Commission, in spite of Kane and Hamilton's stated commitment to go to the facts, makes no mention of any of these facts. In claiming that they started with the facts, Kane and Hamilton say that their commission was not setting out to advocate one theory or interpretation of 9/11 versus another. And yet, they tell us, when we set up our staff teams, we told one team to tell the story of al-Qaeda's most successful operation, the 9/11 attacks. If that's not starting with a theory, what would be? The 9/11 movement, by contrast, has gotten empirical about this matter. With regard to the alleged hijackers, there was, according to the government, much evidence that implicates, such as video frames of them at airports, passports found at crash sites, and Mohammed Atta's luggage filled with incriminating evidence that they say is luggage that was supposed to get on Flight 11. The 9/11 Truth movement, however, has pointed out that none of this evidence can withstand scrutiny. It contains absurdities, such as when the first plane to strike the World Trade Center is said to have resulted in a passport jumping out of the plane and falling to the ground unsinged by the fireball that was created. Another passport and a red bandana, some people said the hijackers were wearing red bandanas, were found at the crash site of United 93, although none of the plane is visible at the site. According to the official theory, the plane was coming down 580 miles an hour at a steep angle and went into the soft soil of Pennsylvania so hard and so fast it went completely underground. And yet somehow there must have been an open window, the bandana and the passport jumped out. Moreover, the incriminating evidence in Muhammad Atta's alleged luggage contained his will. Now, if you were going to fly a plane into the World Trade Center, would you take your will? I'm unfortunately not making this stuff up. Moreover, the 9/11 Commission, in defending the official conspiracy theory, portrayed Atta and the others as devout Muslims, ready to meet their Maker. But real truth seekers, getting empirical, have pointed out that Atta and several other of the alleged hijackers loved gambling, cocaine, alcohol, pork, and lap dances. These facts were even reported in the Wall Street Journal. And yet the 9/11 Commission, in spite of its professed love for facts, said it had no idea why these men often went to Las Vegas. Another stunning discovery occurred when one member of the 9/11 Truth movement decided to get empirical about an especially puzzling matter. The fact that the FBI's website on Osama bin Laden as a most wanted terrorist said nothing about 9/11. It mentioned other terrorist acts for which he was wanted, but nothing about 9/11. So Ed Haas, who writes the Muckraker Report, which you can read on the internet, contacted Rex Toome, the chief of investigative publicity for the FBI, and asked why not. Toome replied, "The reason why 9/11 is not mentioned on Osama bin Laden's most wanted page is because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11. The 9/11 Commission could have made this discovery. Many months before the 9/11 Commission report appeared, the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Commission, comprised of relatives of the victims, asked the Commission to explain why bin Laden's profile on the FBI's Most Wanted Fugitives poster does not include the 9/11 attacks. However, the fact-loving 9/11 Commission, besides not answering this question, did not even reveal this fact to the American people. Another essential element in the official conspiracy theory is that several passengers on the airliners made phone calls to loved ones that morning, reporting that their plane had been hijacked by foreigners. Some of these calls were reportedly made on seatback phones, and such calls were clearly possible. But cell phones were reportedly used for many of the calls, especially from United Flight 93, from which about 10 cell phone calls were reportedly made. These calls have been publicized by movies about this flight. But there is extremely strong evidence that these calls would not have been possible in 2001. Given the technology at that time, a cell phone had to get a signal from a cell site, and these signals were sent out horizontally, not vertically. There was, to be sure, some leakage upwards, so a cell phone on a low-flying small plane could get a good signal. But as the plane got higher, success became increasingly unlikely. Most anecdotal evidence indicated that calls from small planes were impossible much above 8,000 feet, and that calls from airliners with their much greater mass were generally impossible above 2,000 feet. This anecdotal evidence was in strong tension with the official story, according to which calls were made from airliners flying from 25,000 to 40,000 feet. Seeing this tension, Canadian computer scientist and mathematician Key Dewdney, who had long written a column for Scientific American, decided to get empirical. Going up in a twin-engine airplane, he found that the success rate for attempted cell phone calls decayed to 0 by the time he reached 7,000 feet. Successful cell phone calls from airliners flying at 30,000 feet, he concluded, would have been flat out impossible. Dewdney's conclusion was reinforced by the fact that in 2004, Qualcomm Incorporated announced with great fanfare that it had developed a new kind of technology in which a cellular base station on the plane, called a picocell, uses a satellite to transmit its calls. Passengers on the test flight, Qualcomm announced, were able to place and receive calls as if they were on the ground. American Airlines, which conducted the test flight, said that this new technology would become operative in 2006. The truth of Dewdney's conclusion is also supported by a story in the Travel Technologist, published 1 week after 9/11, which said, "Wireless communication networks weren't designed for ground-to-air communication. Cellular experts privately admit that they're surprised that the calls were able to be placed from the hijacked airplanes. They speculate that the only reason the calls went through in the first place is that the aircraft were flying so close to the ground. But the aircraft were not flying close to the ground. According to the 9/11 Commission itself, United 93 was at 34,300 feet when the passengers began making calls, then climbed to 40,700 feet. How do defenders of the official story handle this problem? During an interview in 2006, a well-informed Canadian journalist, Evan Solomon, posed the following question to Lee Hamilton, the vice chair of the 9/11 Commission. If Flight 93 was flying well over 10,000 feet, 30,000, 40,000 feet, and yet cell phones don't work above 10,000 feet, how could people on their cell phone on a plane phone their relatives? Hamilton replied, "I'm no expert on that. I've been told cell phones work sometimes above 10,000 feet and as high as 30,000 feet. So it may have been that some of the calls went through and some didn't. I just don't know." One problem with Hamilton's answer is that he had been asked about 40,000 feet, not merely 30,000. But the more serious problem is that although Hamilton was one of the leaders of the 9/11 Commission, which defended the official story, said there was no doubt about the fact that it was carried out by hijackers. When challenged about one of the foundational pillars of that story, said, "I just don't know." Moreover, his statement that he had been told that cell phones sometimes worked as high as 30,000 feet suggests that his 9/11 Commission had performed no tests and had not even discussed this issue, although it had long been raised by critics of the official story. Most unempirical. The same lack of empirical curiosity permeates Popular Mechanics' treatment of the issue. Although its authors mention Dewdney's experiments, they try to debunk his conclusions by simply quoting recent interviews with two industry spokesmen who reportedly said that it was possible to make a call, or by simply quoting recent interviews with two industry spokesmen who reportedly said that it was possible to make a call, or at least get a signal, at 35,000 feet. They cite no written evidence from 2001 to support this claim. And even though Popular Mechanics would have had the financial resources to carry out extensive experiments to try to disprove Dewdney's conclusions, they did not. Or at least if they did, they did not report the results. This kind of unempirical approach characterizes their whole book, in spite of its subtitle, Why Conspiracy Theories Can't Stand Up to the Facts. Here's another interesting fact about the alleged cell phone calls. In the spring of 2006, at the same time moviegoers were watching United 93, the FBI, during the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, reduced the claim about cell phone calls from this flight down to 2. These being 2 calls allegedly made close to the ground. So while Popular Mechanics was defending the government's claim that all the alleged cell phone calls from Flight 93 went through, the government was quietly withdrawing this claim. What about the well-known alleged phone call, the one from Barbara Olson on American Flight 77 to her husband Ted Olson, who was the U.S. Solicitor General, a key figure in the Bush-Cheney administration? His testimony about this call has from the first contained inconsistencies, one of which involved the kind of phone she used. He first said it was an airplane phone, then in his next interview that it was a cell phone. He later reverted to his original answer, saying that calling collect, she used the phone in the passenger seat. By settling on this answer, his claim was no longer threatened by the evidence that a cell phone call would have been impossible. But was even a call from a seatback phone possible from Flight 77? In my book, I said that it was not, because Flight 77 had no onboard phones. This was based on email messages from American Airlines in 2004 saying that the Boeing 757s made for American Airlines, unlike those made for United, had no onboard phones. Even if American 757s did have onboard phones, this fact would do little to overcome the implausibility of Ted Olson's report about her calls. One problem is that she was the only person who allegedly used an onboard phone to make a call from that flight. And yet, she reportedly said that all the passengers were herded to the back of the plane. Are we to believe that they watched Barbara Olson make 2 calls from an onboard phone, and none of the other 60-some people said, oh, golly, maybe I'll grab an onboard phone and make a call to my own loved ones? Furthermore, she reportedly said that the hijackers were armed, but all she mentioned were knives and box cutters. And these hijackers were very small men, from 5 foot to 5'7" at the most. There would have been only 3 or 4 of them in the cabin. At least one, Hani Hanjour, had to be flying the plane. And here we have 60-some passengers and crew, and she specifically said both pilots. One of those pilots was Charles Chick Burlingame. Are we supposed to believe that these 60-some people, led by Burlingame, could not have easily overpowered these 3 or 4 small men with knives and box cutters? The whole story is just absurd. Still another problem has been pointed out by British Columbia's Roland Morgan. He said, he has written, Ted Olson could shut up his critics by simply producing the Department of Justice's telephone accounts, showing a couple of hefty reverse charges entries charged from Flight 77's airphone number at around about 9:20 a.m. on the 11th of September 2001. But such accounts have never been produced. The official story simply cannot handle the facts about cell phones or about Barbara Olson's alleged call. But how does the 9/11 Truth movement handle the fact that so many people reported receiving calls from their loved ones from these flights? Do we have to claim implausibly that all of these people were lying? No, because even though the cell phone technology was not in place at that time to make such calls, there was another kind of technology that was. I speak of the technology of voice morphing. It was sufficiently perfected in 1999 as a test demonstrated that was reported in the Washington Post. In this test, the voice of General Carl Steiner, who was quite well known, was heard to say, "Gentlemen, we have called you together to inform you that we are going to overthrow the United States government." Now, Steiner, of course, never said any such thing, but everybody in the room would have sworn that was Steiner's voice. These people who sell these things even advertise, "You can fool your spouse." They're that good. The technology is that good. So, the technology was available to fool the people who received these calls, to think they were really hearing from their loved ones. Whether Ted Olson was a victim of this trickery or simply lied about the call from his wife is something we will not know until there is a real investigation into 9/11. By the way, we don't even have to rely on this. You can just look at the content of some of these calls and see that they're faked. The most famous one, of course, is when Mark Bingham called his mother. And his mother's sister, I believe it was, answered the phone and talked to, and said, "Oh, it's your son Mark who's on the phone." So she picked up the phone and said, "Hello, Mark." And he said, "Hello, Mom, this is Mark Bingham." Another case, Tom and Dina Burnett, the other probably most famous call. He allegedly made 4 calls. In the last one, he told her, he was on Flight 93, told her, "We've decided we're going to rush the hijackers and we're going to bring the plane down over a rural area, so, you know, we will save a congested area." And then she said, "Well, you know, the kids are right here and would like to talk to you." And he said, "Oh, tell them I'll talk to them later." In any case, these are some of the things we've learned by getting empirical about 9/11. But there's much more. Another issue is why, assuming the truth of the story that the planes were hijacked, the U.S. military failed to intercept them before they could strike their targets. The official story is that it was the FAA's fault. For the first 3 years, the military claimed that although the FAA did notify it about all 4 flights, these notifications came too late. But the 9/11 Truth movement, getting empirical, showed that even if the FAA had been as slow as the military claimed, there still would have been time for the interceptions to be made. These things can happen very quickly. This empirical research supported the idea that there had been a stand-down order canceling standard procedures. However, in the summer of 2004, perhaps in response to these findings, the 9/11 Commission, in producing its report, came up with a radically new story, saying that the FAA, after notifying the military about the first flight only 9 minutes before it crashed into the North Tower, did not notify it about the other 3 flights at all until after they had already. New story, saying that the FAA, after notifying the military about the first flight only 9 minutes before it crashed into the North Tower, did not notify it about the other 3 flights at all until after they had already crashed. This new story was popularized by Michael Bronner in a Vanity Fair article called 9/11, the NORAD tapes, to which I devote the first chapter of my book. The tapes in question were used by the 9/11 Commission to construct its new story. The military later gave these tapes to Bronner, who, as one of the producers of the film United 93, had proven that he would faithfully support the official line. The fact that Bronner was singled out by the military to receive these tapes means that his article can be considered a semi-official report. And Bronner surely did what the military had hoped, claiming that these tapes present the authentic military history of 9/11. But there are many reasons to doubt this claim. Let's take the claim that the FAA's air traffic controllers did not contact the military about the first flight, American Flight 11, until 8:38, only 9 minutes before it hit the tower. This would have been 24 minutes after the controller had seen the first sign of trouble, and 13 minutes after they knew that the plane appeared to be hijacked. There are many reasons to doubt this account. One of these involves discoveries I made while writing 9/11, Debunking 9/11 Debunking. Generally, I simply report other people's discoveries, but this time I did a little empirical work myself. This work involved extended email conversations with 2 air traffic controllers who have worked at FAA's Boston Center, which was in charge of Flight 11 when its troubles developed. Robin Horton, who worked there until 1981 and now lives in the Seattle area, and Colin Scoggins, who was and still is the military expert at Boston Center. Because of the information provided to me by these 2 men, we now have a much stronger evidence than we had before, which was pretty strong, that the official story about American Flight 11 is false. Although Scoggins did not himself say this, the information that he provided shows that his phone call to the military, to NEADS, must have occurred at about 8:29, not 8:38, as the official account claims. This would mean that the military had 18 minutes, not merely 9 minutes, to intercept Flight 11 before it got to Manhattan. Plenty of time, given the fact that such interceptions are usually made within 10 minutes. Horton's information shows, moreover, that the military must have been contacted even earlier, shortly after 8:20, when the transponder signal was lost and the plane went radically off course, as well as already having lost radio contact. This means that the military would have had over 25 minutes to make the interception. We have, therefore, very strong evidence that the military had been given a stand-down order, canceling standard procedures. This is only one of many examples in my book showing that if we get empirical, we can see that the tapes do not provide the authentic military history of 9/11. They have been doctored. Another claim made by the 9/11 Commission, then repeated by Bronner, is that there were only 2 bases in the northeast sector of the United States with fighter jets on alert: Otis Air National Guard Base in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and Langley Air Force Base in Langley, Virginia. Bronner, on the basis of this claim, says, referring to Colonel Robert Marr, the head of NEADS, incredibly, Marr has only 4 armed fighters at his disposal to defend about a quarter of the continental United States. Although this claim truly is incredible in the literal sense of the term, Bronner uses it, along with the 9/11 Commission, to explain why fighters were not immediately put over New York City to protect it, and why fighters to protect Washington, D.C. had to come all the way up from Langley. However, if Bronner and the Commission, while interviewing Scoggins, had asked him about this, he could have told them what he told me, that although it is technically correct that Otis and Langley are the only bases in that part of the United States that are designated as alert bases, this does not mean that they are the only bases from which NEADS could have drawn fighters. There were ready fighters in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Toledo, Ohio, Syracuse, New York, Burlington, Vermont, and Selfridge, Michigan, as well as Andrews Air Force Base right next to Washington, D.C., on which NEADS could have called. Once again, if we get empirical about 9/11, the official story disintegrates. Popular Mechanics makes an even more outlandish claim about alert fighters, alleging that after the end of the Cold War, the United States did not keep any armed fighters on alert. They support this claim with a statement by former Republican Senator Warren Rudman, who was quoted in a Boston Globe article as saying, "We don't have capable fighter aircraft loaded with missiles sitting on runways in this country. We just don't do that anymore. To expect American fighter aircraft to intercept commercial airliners is totally unrealistic." This quotation comes at the conclusion of Popular Mechanics' section on interceptions, in which it argued that the military's failure to intercept the airlines does not mean that there had been a stand-down order. This quotation was evidently intended as the knockout punch. However, if one actually reads the Boston Globe article, one finds that it does not conclude with that quotation from Rudman. Instead, the writer follows it by saying, "Otis offers something close to that posture, however. Its 102nd Fighter Wing is equipped with 2 armed and fueled aircraft ready to fly around the clock each day of the year." So much for Popular Mechanics' knockout punch and its honesty. What was true at Otis, incidentally, was true of other alert bases around the country. For example, Captain Tom Pickle Herring, a pilot at Homestead Air Reserve Base near Miami, was quoted in 1999 as saying, "We have weapons on our jets. We need to be postured such that no one would dare threaten us. If needed, we could be killing things in 5 minutes or less." What he means is from scramble order to being up several thousand feet in the air, going after other planes, 5 minutes or less. As this and many other examples show, the subtitle of the Popular Mechanics book needs to be expanded to read, "How Conspiracy Theories Cannot Stand Up to the Facts If We Are Allowed to Determine What the Facts Are." Another question that can be answered responsibly only on the basis of an empirical investigation of the facts is why 3 buildings of the World Trade Center collapsed after 2 of them were struck by airplanes. Early reports claimed that the fires had melted the steel. A BBC television special 2 days after 9/11 quoted 2 experts as saying this. But some early members of the 9/11 truth movement, getting empirical, pointed out that although steel does not begin to melt until it reaches about 1,500 degrees Celsius, 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, the maximum temperature that can be reached by diffuse fires based on hydrocarbons such as jet fuel, kerosene, would be about 1,000 degrees Celsius, 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Accordingly, even if the fires had been as hot as building fires can possibly be, they could not come within 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit of the temperature needed to melt steel. In response to they could not come within 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit of the temperature needed to melt steel. In response to this debunking by the 9/11 truth movement, Popular Mechanics has accused the 9/11 movement of creating a straw man, which it could easily knock down. It implies, in other words, that no defenders of the official theory had ever said that the buildings collapsed because their steel melted. But the falsity of this claim is illustrated by the BBC special. It has also been much more recently by Lee Hamilton, the vice chair of the 9/11 Commission, while he was being interviewed by Evan Solomon of the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. Hamilton, saying that the Commission rejected the view that the buildings were brought down by explosives, said, "What caused the collapse of the buildings was that the superheated jet fuel melted the steel superstructure of these buildings." Hamilton's astounding statement suggests that the 9/11 Commission, while endorsing the government's theory that the towers collapsed because of the impact of the airplanes and the resulting fires, did not even discuss such elementary facts as the melting point of steel and the maximum temperature of diffuse hydrocarbon fires. The definitive report on the destruction of the towers was supposed to be provided by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. But its report, in spite of its thousands of pages, is far from definitive. Journalists have typically assumed that because the NIST report is based on the work of scientists, it is a scientific report. One of the main problems with the report, however, is that its conclusions are radically at variance with the work of its own scientists. For example, NIST suggests that the steel columns in the core of the towers buckled because they were heated up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point they would have lost 90% of their strength. NIST's own scientists, however, reported that none of the recovered steel had reached temperatures over 250 degrees Celsius, 480 degrees Fahrenheit. And these were columns around the perimeter of the building where there would have been more oxygen. The 47 core columns would have not gotten even that hot because so little oxygen was available in the core of the buildings. So although NIST claims that the towers collapsed because their core columns reached 1,000 degrees Celsius or 1,800 Fahrenheit, studies by its own scientists show that the core columns could not have been even 1/4 that hot. As this example shows, the NIST report on which popular mechanics and much of the press has relied is not a scientific report. It is a political document put out by an agency of the Bush administration. Equally unempirical is the treatment by NIST and popular mechanics of reports of explosions before and during the collapses. Both documents pretend that there were no explosions, even though the last time I checked Google for testimonies of explosions in the World Trade Center, I found that there were close to 300,000 items. One of those items is an essay I wrote entitled Explosive Testimony, which quotes 41 people, including firefighters, emergency medical workers, employees of the World Trade Center, and journalists, reporting that they witnessed what seemed to be explosions. For example, Wall Street reporter John Bussey. You all know the Wall Street Journal, that left-wing rag. Its reporter John Bussey said, "I looked up out of my office window to see what seemed like perfectly synchronized explosions coming from each floor, one after the other, from top to bottom. The floors blew to pieces." Another item on the internet is an essay by Canadian professor Graham McQueen, which shows that even if we restrict our focus to members of the New York Fire Department, we have 118 testimonies suggestive of explosions in the towers. NIST and popular mechanics, however, write as if these testimonies did not exist. Nothing better illustrates their wholly unempirical, unscientific approach. This unempirical approach is reflected, moreover, in journalistic accounts that rely on these official and semi-official reports. For example, Alexander Coburn, in assuring his readers that members of the 9/11 Truth Movement are nuts, said, "People inside who survived the collapse didn't hear a series of explosions." Coburn thereby revealed that he had not studied the evidence enough to be aware of one of the best-known testimonies by a person inside the towers, North Tower employee Teresa Valise. She said that while she was making her way downstairs, there were explosions going off everywhere. I was convinced that there were bombs planted all over the place, and someone was sitting at a control panel, pushing detonator buttons. There was another explosion, and another. I didn't know where to run. As Coburn's embarrassing essay demonstrates, journalists cannot safely rely on reports written to support the official conspiracy theory. They need to get empirical about 9/11. NIST and Popular Mechanics, besides dealing with testimony about explosions in an unempirical manner, do the same with regard to reports that molten metal was found under the rubble. The scientists at NIST, unlike Lee Hamilton, knew the fire could not have melted any steel. So their preferred method of dealing with this problem was to ignore or even deny the reports. John Gross, one of the chief authors of the NIST report, was captured on film while he was making a public presentation, saying that he knew of absolutely no eyewitness who has said there was a pool of molten steel. Popular Mechanics cites a professor's claim that the photographs said to show melted steel really show materials that appear to be other than steel, such as glass with unmelted steel rods in it. Popular Mechanics then quotes triumphantly this professor's observation that glass melts at a much lower temperature than steel. However, the evidence for molten steel under the rubble was neither non-existent nor based merely on photographs. There were many eyewitnesses, including Peter Tully, president of Peter Tully Construction Company, which was involved in the cleanup. He said that he saw pools of literally molten steel at the site. The same was reported by Mark Loiseau, the head of Controlled Demolition Incorporated, and also by Fire Captain Philip Rivolo, who said, "You'd get down below and you would see molten steel, running down the channel rails like you're in a foundry, like lava." Although these and many other eyewitness testimonies exist, NIST writes as if they did not. Nevertheless, surely knowing that they do, NIST has suggested, in a document put out in 2006 entitled Answers to Frequently Asked Questions, that even if there was some molten steel in the rubble pile, it was more likely due to the high temperature resulting from long exposure to combustion within the pile than to explosions. Popular Mechanics expanded on this incredible explanation, saying, "The debris pile sat cooking for weeks, with the materials at the bottom of the pile getting increasingly hot because the fires were confined and lost minimal heat to the atmosphere. As a result, the fires could have easily reached temperatures sufficient to melt steel." This is amazing. If you remember high school physics and chemistry, hydrocarbon fires require oxygen. According to NIST and Popular Mechanics, however, the fact that the fires were not exposed to the atmosphere did not extinguish the fires, it allowed them to get hotter. Indeed, over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. This is what passes for science at NIST and Popular Mechanics these days. According to the official conspiracy theory, the Pentagon was struck by American Airlines Flight 77 under the control of Hani Hanjour. I'm now asking the question, what caused the damage to Wedge 1 of the Pentagon? However, Hani Hanjour was known to be a terrible pilot, so bad that he could not safely fly a single-engine airplane. Instructors would not go up with him a second time, saying, "You're too dangerous." And yet, in order to hit Wedge 1, according to the official story, He had to perform an amazing feat in his hijacked airliner, bring it down 8,000 feet in a 330-degree downward spiral in under 4 minutes, then bring it in at ground level without even scraping the lawn. Getting empirical about this claim would simply mean asking some experienced airline pilots if this was possible. Russ Wittenberg, one of the many pilots who belong to the 9/11 Truth movement, says that he, in spite of his 35 years of experience flying commercial airliners, could not have done it. For an amateur who couldn't even fly a Cessna to maneuver the jetliner in such a highly professional manner, Wittenberg adds, would have been totally impossible. Ralph Omholt, a former 757 pilot, agrees, saying, "The idea that an unskilled pilot could have flown this trajectory is simply too ridiculous to consider." How did Popular Mechanics deal with this problem? It ignored it. Although its authors like to tell us how many experts they consulted, they do not report asking any airline pilots if Hanjour could have flown this trajectory. Indeed, they do not even mention this trajectory. They refer to this part of the alleged flight of American 77 only in passing. That is, after arguing that although Hanjour had never flown an airliner and was a terrible pilot, he was able to get this plane back to Washington by simply putting it on autopilot. And then they add, he steered the plane manually for only the final 8 minutes of the flight. For only the final 8 minutes when the impossible was done. Popular Mechanics claims that it has shown all the key claims of the 9/11 Truth movement to be mistaken. One of the movement's central claims, however, is that whatever damaged the Pentagon, it could not have been Flight 77 under the control of Hani Hanjour. Popular Mechanics does not even try to refute this claim, perhaps hoping that most of its readers will not notice. There has been much controversy within the 9/11 movement itself as to exactly what happened at the Pentagon. But on this point, there is absolute unanimity. Even those who believe that it was a Boeing 757 may even believe that it was Flight 77, say, but of course it couldn't have been under the control of Hani Hanjour. So we've got absolute unanimity on that point. And on my next one. The Popular Mechanics book also fails to deal with another claim on which there is unanimity, that if Al-Qaeda terrorists had hijacked an airliner in order to crash it into the Pentagon, they would have not chosen to hit Wedge 1. This claim is based on several empirical facts about this section of the Pentagon. For one thing, Wedge 1 was the only section that had been renovated to make it less vulnerable to terrorist attacks. Also, because the renovation was not yet complete, it was only sparsely populated. A strike on any other part of the Pentagon, therefore, would have caused far more damage and far more death. Moreover, terrorists who hated America would presumably have wanted to kill some of the Pentagon's top brass and the Secretary of Defense. And yet these people were safely on the opposite side of the Pentagon, as far from Wedge 1 as possible. All these facts, moreover, were well known. If these terrorists were brilliant enough to outfox the world's most sophisticated defense system, they would not have gone out of their way to hit Wedge 1 when they could have simply crashed into the roof above the offices of Donald Rumsfeld and the senior officers. Here is what Popular Mechanics says about this problem. That was it. Popular Mechanics has definitely not defended the idea that the Pentagon was struck by American Flight 77 under the control of Hani Hanjour. Another problem with the official conspiracy theory involves the crash of United Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. At first, the official story was that it crashed because the heroic passengers brought it down. The story was later changed to say that the hijackers brought it down because they feared that the heroic passengers were going to overcome them and gain control of the plane. And so they brought it down at 580 miles per hour. From the first, however, there was considerable evidence that the flight was actually shot down by a U.S. military jet. This evidence is of many types. Witnesses reported seeing debris falling from the plane. Debris was spread over an 8-mile area. One engine or part of it was found far from the crash site, suggesting that it was hit by a heat-seeking missile. There was no plane at the crash site, leaving officials with no option but to claim that the plane had buried itself completely underground, except, of course, for the bandana and the passport. Several residents in the area reported seeing a small white jet plane prior to the crash and hearing sounds suggesting a shoot-down by a missile. One resident said she received a call from a friend who reported shortly after the crash that her husband, who was in the Air Force, had called and said, "I can't talk, but we just shot down a plane." One of the Otis pilots reported being told after he returned to base that an airliner had been shot down in Pennsylvania by a military F-16. Popular Mechanics deals with a few of the items in this list by distorting the evidence and with the rest by simply ignoring them. You can read all of this in my book. Here I will focus only on the most important element in its attempted refutation of the claim that United 93 was shot down. This is the claim that made by the 9/11 Commission that the military could not possibly have shot the plane down because it didn't even know the plane had been hijacked until after it had crashed. Here is Popular Mechanics' statement as to whether a fighter could have shot down the plane. The 9/11 Commission report is clear that no shoot-down order was in place for Flight 93 due to garbled communication between the various agencies. When the flight crashed, NORAD was still unaware the plane had been hijacked. It is true that the 9/11 Commission makes this claim, but is this claim supported by the available facts? The editors of Popular Mechanics, in their introduction, said that they were going to confront the claims of the 9/11 Truth Movement with the facts. But what they do here is simply confront the claim of the 9/11 Truth Movement with the claim made by the 9/11 Commission that the military did not learn about the hijacking of Flight 93 until 10:07, several minutes after it had crashed. In citing this claim as authoritative, it simply ignores the empirical fact that many of the participants made statements that contradicted the Commission's claim. Here are some examples. General Larry Arnold was the commanding general of NORAD within the continental United States. When asked by the 9/11 Commission what NORAD was doing at 9/24, Arnold said, "Our focus was on Flight 93, which was being pointed out to us very aggressively by the FAA. 9/24 was 40 minutes earlier than the 9/11 Commission later claims the FAA told the military about this flight." During an interview with Peter Jennings on ABC in 2002, Brigadier General Montague Winfield, who was the Deputy Director of Operations at the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, said, "We received the report from the FAA that Flight 93 had turned off its transponder and was heading towards Washington, D.C. Other military officers have testified that, besides knowing about United 93, the military was tracking it. 2 days after 9/11, General Myers himself said that fighters were scrambled on the airliner that eventually crashed in Pennsylvania. We had gotten somebody close to it. 2 days after 9/11, Paul Wolfowitz, who was then Deputy Secretary of Defense, said that the Air Force was tracking the hijacked plane that crashed in Pennsylvania and had been in position to bring it down if necessary. In 2002, Colonel Robert Marr, the head of NEADS, told Peter Jennings that having received shoot-down authorization from Richard Clark, he passed that on to the pilots, adding, "United Airlines Flight 93 will not be allowed to reach Washington, D.C." Two pilots, moreover, have independently said that they received those orders and would have shot down Flight 93 if it had not crashed on its own. Like Wolfowitz, these pilots deny that the flight was actually shot down. But the question at issue is the 9/11 Commission's claim that the military did not even know that this flight had been hijacked. And their testimony, like that of Arnold, Clark, Marr, Myers, Wolfowitz, and Winfield, directly contradicts that claim. We have extremely strong evidence, therefore, that insofar as the NORAD tapes given to the 9/11 Commission and Michael Bronner say otherwise, they have been doctored. They do not provide the authentic military history of 9/11 or anything close to it. In this lecture, I've given several examples of what you can learn about 9/11 if you get empirical, checking the actual facts rather than simply, like popular mechanics and far too many journalists, equating the facts with the claims made by people defending the official conspiracy theory. But if reporters and news organizations would develop the courage to get empirical about 9/11, the official theory will completely unravel. Evidence for this claim is provided by former senior CI analyst Bill Christensen, who said in a letter to friends in August of 2006, "I spent the first 4.5 years since September 11th utterly unwilling to consider seriously the conspiracy theories surrounding the attacks of that day. In the last half year, and after considerable agony, I've changed my mind." In an essay entitled "Stop Belittling the Theories About September 11th," Christensen summarized what he considered the persuasive evidence that the events of September 11th did not unfold as the Bush administration and the 9/11 Commission would have us believe. This conclusion is of overwhelming importance, Christensen argues, because the fraud of 9/11 involves a much greater crime against the American people and people of the world than any other charges of fraud connected with the run-up to the invasion of Iraq in March 2003. Why? It is more important because the events of 9/11 have been used by the administration to justify every single aspect of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East since September 11th. It is Christensen continues, it is more important also because it affects the very core of our entire political system. It is a conspiracy so far successful not only against the people of the United States, but against the entire world. Christensen's analysis makes clear why getting the truth about 9/11 publicly revealed is so important. Getting it revealed, however, will be very difficult. One reason was pointed out by former CIA case officer Robert Baer. He's the man upon whom the movie Syriana was based, the George Clooney character. And he is the one that was assigned to write the review of the new Pearl Harbor for the Nation several years ago, at which time he ridiculed me for being a conspiracy theorist. But during this recent interview with Tom Hartman of Portland, he indicated that he had changed his mind. Now he believed 9/11 was an inside job. But explaining why this getting the truth out will be difficult, Baer went on to say, a lot of people in the United States have profited from 9/11. Great fortunes are being made. This is a problem for getting the truth about 9/11 revealed, because those who are making great fortunes include corporations who wield great influence over what can be reported in the mainstream media. Nevertheless, I believe there is still hope that the truth may come out. Other countries, such as Canada and several European countries, may begin exposing the lies so loudly that the American press will not be able to pretend not to hear. The activist side of the 9/11 truth movement in the United States and other countries may begin organizing mass rallies to demand that the truth finally be told. The Democrats, now in control of Congress, may develop the courage to hold hearings about 9/11. If so, the press will have little choice but to report on them. At some point, the press will realize that to save its own reputation, it will need to get out front on this story so that it can take credit for revealing it. The 9/11 truth movement is now far stronger than it was only a year ago, thanks to the addition over this past year of many more scientists, architects, engineers, pilots, and former members of the military and intelligence services. It is now much more obvious that the 9/11 movement is based on professional, informed evaluations of the empirical evidence, and that it is the official story that fits what most people mean when they say that they reject conspiracy theories. Theories that, being based on groundless speculation, are wildly at odds with the evidence, except evidence that has been planted. But perhaps the greatest boon to the 9/11 truth movement is the fact that in 2006, defenders of the official theory changed their strategy. Rather than continuing simply to ridicule or completely ignore the claims of the 9/11 truth movement, they decided to try to debunk our claims. These attempts backfired because they served only to make clear how completely at variance with the empirical evidence the official theory is. They made clear that the official story cannot be defended. By demonstrating this, my latest book is evidently more convincing than my previous ones. In a statement on Amazon.com, international lawyer John Whitbeck says, after reading David Ray Griffin's previous books on the subject, I was over 90% convinced that 9/11 was an inside job. Now, after reading Debunking 9/11 Debunking, I regret to say, 100% convinced. I hope this book will help the worldwide 9/11 truth movement finally get the truth out about 9/11 and get the big lie exposed. Thank you very much for your kind attention.